webinar, more detail on our level being webinar 9 mastery program, level being 9 mastery program. Wow! Mastery program. Level being 9 mastery.
Okay.
Right, action stations.
Right.
So, this is really just how you would go about getting everything ready before you did an inspection for your hive. So the first thing you do is get your smoker going, you get your hive tool ready, and then you get, because quite often you would be geographically, my car would be parked somewhere and then I'd have to walk down with my gear. So it's all right here, but this is what I'd normally do, and then I'd come and look at the entrance of the hive, dismantle it, and then we'll go through the bit where you do the cleaning up after. Okay? Lovely.
Okay.
Right, so I've got my smoker in a metal box. You get your smoker fuel, which is some sort of neutral paper. You really don't want to have anything that has got coloured ink on it, because the ink can, it's got chemicals in it and that might upset the bees. So you've usually got a good gas lighter, which I hope is going to work. Doesn't, I should be sad. And then I'm just going to set fire to this and pop it in there and hope that when I set fire to a bit of egg box on top, that's going to work. So pump the bellows. It's good that we've got the sound of this actually, and try and get the smoke going. And because of its demonstration, of course, this will all go horribly wrong. But pop that in there. And normally you put a bit of grass or foliage on the top so the smoke isn't too hot when it comes into contact with the bees. Now previously I bunged up this hole to stop the smoker smoking, so I'm just going to take the plug out, put the lid on properly. With a bit of luck I'm going to get it to produce a large amount of smoke. So normally you wouldn't do this right next to the hive, I'm just doing this for the demonstration. This isn't going to be the world's best bit of smoker lighting. Here we go, this is a bit better. I normally use more fuel, more light and stuff like that, but since we aren't going to use it. So the next thing I'm doing is get my hive tool ready, and my hive tool is kept in a solution of washing soda. And before you go into the hive, you clean your hive tool off, and this is washing soda, and you've just got a kitchen scrubby thing. And I've got a monogrammed hive tool to stop my friends from nicking it. So you just clean that off so it's nice and clean. And then you should of course have a clean cloth to dry it on, but I'm afraid that's a sort of a ropey cloth that I've got there, but still. And then in your suit, you've got a special pocket you can keep it in. So you've actually got a little pocket there that you can keep your hive tool in. So, the reason why you get your smoker and everything ready first is normally you'd be walking to your bees with your smoker lit and your hive tool on you, ready to sort of do your work. So we're just assuming that I've walked down and I've got my stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my bits of elastic around my thumbs, because one thing bees like to do, it shouldn't be this stretchy, but one thing bees like to do is to sneak up your sleeves, and then if they get caught up there, they're going to accidentally sting you. So the bee doesn't want that, and I don't want that. The other thing with having long hair is you really have to tie your hair back so you don't get it all caught in the veil when you zip up the veil. So I'm going to tie my hair back and put my veil up. The reason why you don't ever light your smoker when you have your veil on is, of course, the veil itself is made of nylon, which you're about to see, and if you accidentally set fire to your nylon veil, it's going to melt onto your face, which would be extremely unfortunate. And exactly the same way, you have always make sure your zip is completely done up, and that these two zips here are done up, and there's Velcro there to hold that in place, and there's Velcro at the back so you don't get any bees sneaking in. Back here. Now the other thing is you don't have any holes in your veil, so I always check before I set out and do any beekeeping. I have actually got a hole in here and I've repaired it. So even if you do get a hole, you can probably, can you just see the repair? I've just put another piece over there. Because the one thing you don't want is bees sneaking in to the veil while you're working, because it's very distracting. So it is possible to repair them though. So unfortunately, even though we've got C19, bees suffer from a lot of diseases as well. So I'm going to put some rubber gloves on to prevent me transferring disease from one colony to the next. Now I use these marigolds, and I find they're actually easier to handle than the disposable gloves.
Mama, please.
Sorry, I'm just making sure I've got my sleeves well in there so there's no places bees can sneak in. Yeah. So I usually use these marigolds, and you can put them in the washing machine with a bee suit. They're a bit sort of squidgy and disgusting and you have to blow them inside out, but you can wash them several times and they'll be fine. You can use ordinary sort of vinyl gloves, and you can also wash these, and these are super slimy and disgusting, but they do get stained with something called propolis, and that is a substance which bees make from tree sap. They chew it up and it has it really does stain, but these have actually been through the wash. So if I was walking towards a live hive with bees in, the first thing I'd do is have a look and see what the bees were doing. So this is the entrance to the hive, and I wouldn't usually put my hand there and point to it, but for the purposes of this I have. You'd be watching the bees flying to and fro, and you'd have a look to see...
Can you point to the entrance then?
Okay, even though I wouldn't normally do this. So there's the entrance to the hive, and you'd be watching the bees flying to and fro, and you'd have a look and see whether they had any pollen on their legs, which would mean that there are larvae in there and the hive is healthy. And you just watch, you'd see how many bees they were, and just, generally what they were doing. Then you take your smoker, which amazingly enough is still operating, and what you tend to do is just give a little puff of smoke at the entrance. Now not all beekeepers do this, an awful lot do, and this just sort of lets the bees know that you're going to be taking the hive apart. So the first thing to do is I'm going to take the roof off, and I'm going to put the roof down here, and as I take the hive apart I'm going to put the parts in the roof, because that stops them coming into contact with the ground and picking up any spores from the soil, like botulinum spores, which then might contaminate the honey and cause problems further down the line. Now this is what they call a multi-purpose board, and it's a really awful one. I made this, and my plywood has warped because beehives have got a lot of humidity in them from the bees going about their daily business and evaporating the nectar into honey. And even though I thought I bought marine ply, this is not marine ply, and it's quite dirty, so it needs cleaning. So I'll put that down. And this is called super because it's on top of the main box, so that's from the Latin super for above. And it's a box, and there are metal runners. You would have honeycombs on there which the bees were filling up with nectar. But as this is just a demo, I've only brought one honeycomb, so you can't actually sort of see this. So normally you would pick this up, and it would be full of bees and full of combs, so it would be quite heavy. Normally this would be full of combs and full of bees, but for the purpose of this demo, we haven't got any bees in here. So the combs would be running horizontally on these runners, and they're metal runners, and the substance that you can see around here is propolis, and this is what the bees create from the tree sap, and they use it to sort of pretty much glue little gaps together. So normally a colony like this would have about 10 of these, and these are usually bought flat pack, and you hammer them together, and so I've hammered together this one. So you would take the comb out, and you would be looking to have a look at the brood or the stores or whatever else is on the frame. So the first thing you want to do is shake the bees off. So you hold the comb mostly in the box and you give it a vigorous shake. Yep, so you give it a vigorous shake. So you want all the bees to fall into the box because you don't want them sort of knocked off the comb, wandering around, wondering what's going on. So you knock the bees into the box, but you will always get a few bees that are sort of hanging on in there, and if you want to look at the comb carefully, you have to brush them off. Now you can buy a commercial bee brush, but I find that these actually entangle the bees' legs and make the bees very unhappy. So usually I actually have a feather in the roof of each hive so that there's no transmission of disease between hives. But you can also keep it in your pocket while you're using it, so that's quite convenient. So to remove the last few bees off the frame, you would just brush them lightly into the hive. So this particular hive is nice and clean, and there's no propolis sticking the frames down. But if the hive was in use and the bees were making propolis, you would have to lever this first frame up using your hive tool. And generally speaking, when you're in the hive, you try and not to have your hands over the top where the bees are flying and moving around. You tend to keep them off to the side. Some bees will sort of be walking around on the top of the frames, and so when you're manipulating the frames, you just have to move very slowly and carefully so that you don't squash any bees. And if you're moving the frame, you might get bees trapped in this area here where the runners are, so you have to move very carefully so that you don't squash any bees, partly because it's not very kind to squash bees, and partly because if the colony suspects that they are under attack, i.e. they can smell squashed bee smell, they might decide that they're going to come and sting you. So you have to move carefully. If you do get stung, it's uncomfortable, but it's not the end of the world. And one thing you can do is disrupt this pheromone by smoking where you've been stung. And then this will deaden the pheromone scent which the bees will be drawn to. I'm getting the smoke going now, it's going to give up, isn't it? As it smokers only, that's it, it's working now. Smokers only smoke when you don't want them to. That's okay. So, once you have completed your work, and you might be looking to see if the bees are planning on swarming, you might just be looking to make sure there's no disease in the hive, you would put everything back in the order that you took it out. And this is because smell is very important to bees, and you can disrupt them if you start moving everything around. So you would then put this back, and you imagine it's all full of bees and there are bees crawling around. So there are bees crawling around here and there's bees crawling around here. So what you would do is sort of just wiggle it a little bit so they get the idea that two surfaces are coming together and that they probably don't want to be part of a sandwich. And you put it down very carefully and you listen, because if a bee happens to be stuck, they will make this quite big buzzing noise, and you'll know that if you lift up this quickly, they'll be okay. So normally you would just reassemble the hive. What I wanted to do was show you how you can clean hive parts using a blowtorch. So rather than reassemble all this, I'm just going to show you how I would clean it. Right, so the first thing I would do is actually take my gloves off because they will melt if I blowtorch them, and that would be highly dangerous. I blow them inside out the right way round later. And take my veil off because I don't want to set fire to it and also melt it onto my face. So normally I would have a special wax bucket which would look very much like the bucket I keep my washing soda in to collect up the wax, because wax can be a source of bacteria and viruses that might affect other domestic bees or indeed wild bees, so you really don't want to have wax messing around. So what you do, you want to get the wax off the crown board, and you can just scrape it, and there's wax. So you then would collect all that wax up and you would take it away, and you can melt it down and turn it into candles and all sorts of other things, but what you wouldn't do is just throw it on the ground because of the danger of causing contamination in the environment. And you can see, even though that didn't look like there was sort of very much wax, if you scrape, there's actually a fair bit. This is also an absolutely disgusting falling apart crown board, so I'm sure my beekeeping colleagues will be utterly horrified that I'm using this as a demo. But there's your wax. So this is just, as I say, a grubby piece of equipment I happen to have lying around. And we might as well do a proper job, so I'll scrape any other bits off there. And then we'll collect them all up. And of course, normally I wouldn't be doing this on top of a hive either, because that would be a bad idea. This is just for the purpose. And this is the resin that I mentioned before that the bees produce. So I should have said that this is what propolis is what the bees produce from resin. They don't produce resin; they produce propolis from resin. So we want to make sure that's right. And you can just scrape that off. And normally, I'd have a large bucket or a bag that I could just get all this detritus into easily. So I've shaken all the bits in there, and now we're going to try and sterilise all these crevices where it's almost impossible to scrape into, where there could be pathogens lurking. So we're going to set this off. This is a butane propane mix. You can smell the perfume from the propolis though, can't you? Now this is an awful old crown board which is really only fit for firewood. Yeah, so it shouldn't actually be burning like that, but it's just because it's so old and it's the only one I had handy for the demo. Okay, so it's really going to go up in flames along there. So it's a poor old thing, and I'm just going to give the rest of it a light scorching, really just until the wax starts to melt. And you cover the entire board and the exterior. And usually you would treat all the parts of the beehive like this before you put your bees into them to make sure that the environment is sterile for them. And that is pretty much it. So there we go. So I'm now just going to plug the end of the smoker up with leaves, and I'm just going to put that in the box. And normally I leave a feather in each hive so there's no danger of disease transmission, so I put it in the roof. I've just remembered that bit. Not everyone does this, but I do. So I have my feather in there ready to use next time. And then Normally I would have my gloves on because I wouldn't have just been doing the stuff with the blowtorch. So I'd wash my gloves and I'd put my hive tool in here and I'd seal that up so I don't end up with a soggy car, because my car's got enough soggy stuff in it already. And that's it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Well done.
Thank you.
Oh, well,
Well,
later.
there you go.
Webinar 9. More detail mastery. On our level being webinar 9. Mastery program. Detail on level 9. Mastery program. Wow. Mastery program. Level being 9. Mastery.